I'm Skylar, and have you ever found yourself stuck in the middle of a conflict between your mother and her lover, a situation where you have no control whatsoever? Well, that's exactly where I found myself, a silent observer of a story that could potentially shatter my life, all because of my own mother. When my mother tied the knot with my father, she was a mere 18 years old. They met at a coffee shop where she worked, and he, a successful businessman, was 33 years her senior when he decided to marry her. But it wasn't love that compelled her to agree, it was something more pragmatic. She saw in him a golden ticket to a life of luxury. After their marriage, my twin brother Charles and I came into the world. Dad adored us, but his love wasn't enough to keep him here. He passed away last summer, leaving us with a substantial inheritance and a plethora of assets. Since we were still minors, Mom became our legal guardian. And that's when the complications began. My brother and I found it difficult to come to terms with our father's passing, a process that Mom seemed to breeze through just a month later. Soon she began dating Owen, a man who placed a disproportionate emphasis on his appearance. Now, don't get me wrong, my mom is an undeniably attractive woman herself, but I had a strong hunch that Owen's attraction was not solely centered on her. Initially, their dates seemed ordinary, involving upscale restaurants and fancy bars. However, over time, I began to sense that something was amiss. Mom decided to introduce him to Charles and me, and she invited him to our home for dinner. It was his first time in our house, and the moment he stepped in, his eyes darted around, greedily soaking in every detail, seemingly in awe of our surroundings. During dinner, as we sat together, he turned to Charles and me and remarked, "You must consider yourselves exceptionally fortunate to reside in such an opulent house and enjoy all this wealth." Owen seemed fixated on wealth and seldom showed any genuine connection with my mom. There was a noticeable absence of chemistry between them, and he often avoided making eye contact with her. This lack of emotional connection became increasingly evident, especially after their first meeting. Mom's frustration grew with every phone call she had with Owen. Even when I was upstairs in my room, I could hear him shouting at her on the phone. Their arguments were frequent, and Owen would frequently threaten to leave her. Mom, deeply devoted and fearful of being alone after Dad's passing, did everything in her power to ensure Owen stayed with her, regardless of the price. And stay he did, but at a considerable cost to us. Mom started lavishing him with incredibly expensive gifts. These weren't your typical presents, they were extravagantly costly. She bought him a Bentley Bentayga and a luxurious house neighboring ours. Rolexes adorned his wrist, and his wardrobe was stocked with designer clothing from Versace, Prada, and Gucci. But it didn't stop there. She even sent him on a solo trip to the Hawaiian Islands when he claimed he needed time to relax and recharge. I wasn't sure if Mom was aware that Owen was blatantly using her, not just for companionship, but also to squander my father's wealth, which was intended to secure Charles's and my future. While my father had been well off, we weren't in the league of billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg. The trajectory we were on indicated that there might come a day when all our family's wealth would be at Owen's disposal. When that time arrived, he would likely sever ties with Mom, leaving Charles and me with nothing. I knew I had to take action. I wasn't going to stand by and let my mom continue down this path indefinitely. But before I had a chance to take action, it appeared that fate had intervened to save us all. During the vacation Owen had wanted to spend alone in Hawaii, my mom decided to surprise him. She flew to Hawaii 2 days later, and you probably won't believe what she discovered. Or maybe you can guess. She found out that Owen hadn't been taking some personal time as he claimed. Instead, he had taken a lavish vacation to Hawaii with his girlfriend, all funded by us. My mom caught him red-handed in an act of infidelity and returned to us heartbroken. Admittedly, it had been rather foolish of my mom to fall for someone like Owen, but at least now she had learned a valuable lesson. We did lose a significant portion of my dad's inheritance that he had left us, but there was still enough remaining for both Charles and me to lead comfortable lives and secure our futures, as well as provide for Mom. Hello, I'm Bella, and a few months ago, I uncovered a shocking truth about my birth parents that my adoptive parents had kept hidden from me all these years. It was a life-altering revelation that shook me to my core. I had been aware since my early childhood that the Warrens, the family who raised me, were friends of my biological family. The Warrens had adopted me after my birth parents passed away in a tragic accident when I was just a baby. While I knew the circumstances of their demise, I had never been told the details of the accident. I grew up happily alongside the Warren family, who already had 3 children of their own. Everything seemed perfectly normal. One day, my friends decided to organize a trip to the beach. I was incredibly excited as I had never experienced a proper beach day before, thanks to Mr. and Mrs. Warren's aversion to such outings. I was convinced that they wouldn't object to my going, but I couldn't have been more mistaken. I pleaded with them, but they remained steadfast in their refusal. I couldn't fathom why they were so insistent. I continued to push the issue, as most teenagers tend to do, right? But what unfolded next would alter the course of my life forever. In the midst of my argument with Mrs. Warren, she uttered a sentence that left me utterly bewildered. She said, "We're afraid you'll meet the same fate as your parents." Her face turned crimson as soon as the words left her lips, realizing what she had revealed. Confused and tearful, I begged for the full story. Mr. Warren asked me to calm down and then began to recount the entire narrative. He explained that my birth parents used to embark on regular fishing trips. On the day of the tragic accident, they had seen a news report warning of an impending storm in the area. Worried for their safety, they decided to cancel the trip. However, their friends, who were supposed to accompany them, convinced my parents that there was nothing to fear since they planned to stay close to the shore. My parents reluctantly agreed, leaving me in the care of the older children at our friend's family home, while the 2 couples set off on their ill-fated trip. The ordeal was far from pleasant. They soon lost control of the fishing boat, which was mercilessly pulled far out to sea by the relentless, strong current. Each couple scrambled into one of the rescue boats that were tethered to their vessel, but misfortune struck as one of these boats turned out to be damaged. The setting was worsened by the thick fog and the fierce storm that enveloped them, rendering their cries for help futile. Tragically, their friends on the other boat were unable to reach or assist them in any meaningful way. Just like that, my parents' lifeless bodies were discovered there the following day, with the official cause of death being recorded as drowning. As Mr. Warren recounted this harrowing tale to me, tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't help but imagine the fear and desperation my parents must have experienced as they were stranded out at sea, waiting for help that would never arrive. My grief overwhelmed me, and I unleashed my anger at Mr. Warren, demanding to know who had been on the boat with my parents, these individuals who had unintentionally sealed their tragic fate. Mr. Warren looked at me, his voice breaking, and delivered a devastating revelation. It was us. I was paralyzed with disbelief. I fled to my room and secluded myself for days, seeking solitude to mourn my poor parents. Nearly half a year has elapsed since I uncovered this painful truth. Mr. and Mrs. Warren repeatedly expressed their remorse, explaining that their guilt had prevented them from disclosing the tragic reality earlier. While my relationship with them has gradually improved over time, I find it incredibly challenging to fully forgive them. I'm Violet, and a few days ago, I stumbled upon something utterly shocking in my boyfriend's room. You see, I had a friend in my piano class named Henry, whom I believed to be gay. We got along well, and I enjoyed spending time with him. One day, my mom came to pick me up from piano class, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. Henry began asking peculiar questions about my mom, like, "How old is your mom? Does your father live with you? What does she do for a living?" I answered his questions, but I couldn't shake my confusion. To my surprise, Henry suggested that he should come over to my house sometime. I thought it sounded harmless enough. After all, he was just a friend, right? So I extended an invitation for dinner at our place. However, an uncomfortable atmosphere settled in during Henry's visit. He and my mom engaged in deep, lengthy conversations that left me feeling like a mere piece of furniture in the room. When the evening finally concluded, I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that was the end of it. Little did I know, the story was far from over. Henry began visiting our home regularly, often without a specific reason, and each time he would engage in unusually protracted discussions with my mom. It grew increasingly frustrating. My mom found him a bit peculiar but generally polite. Trying to change the dynamic, I suggested we visit his house next time. Although he appeared uncomfortable with the idea, he reluctantly agreed. Upon entering his room, I noticed something odd. His walls were plastered with posters of elderly women wearing short skirts. While Henry briefly stepped out to get us some food, my curiosity got the best of me, compelling me to investigate his closet, eager to understand the peculiarities of a gay man's room. However, what I discovered left me utterly astounded. His closet was brimming with women's panties, and not just any panties. These were unmistakably my mother's. There was no doubt about it. They belonged to her. When Henry returned to the room, I hastily concocted an excuse, claiming I had an urgent matter to attend to at home. I apologized and departed from his place, my mind swamped with 1,000 unanswered questions. It seemed inconceivable that my mother could have left those panties with him. Mom had been deeply in love with my dad, and the thought of her cheating on him, especially with a boy almost the same age as her own daughter, was unfathomable. Besides, she found Henry strange. Filled with a rush of anxiety, I hurried back home and immediately approached my mom, inquiring if she had noticed anything missing recently. To my surprise, she admitted that she didn't know where her panties were disappearing to. I was left baffled. What on earth was happening? Could it be that Henry harbored feelings for my mom? It seemed like a plausible explanation. If Henry wasn't gay or attracted to girls my age, it was quite possible that he had a penchant for older women just like my mom. This also offered a rational explanation for the posters adorning his room's walls. I couldn't believe he had dared to think of my mother in such a way. She was my mother, a married woman. I realized that he had used me to get closer to her. Unable to contain my anger, I stormed over to his house. When he opened the door, his entire family was gathered around the table. I didn't care about their presence. All that mattered to me was confronting Henry for his actions. Pointing an accusing finger at him, I unleashed everything I knew. My tirade concluded with the declaration, "I know that you're obsessed with my mother and that you've been using every opportunity to infiltrate my house just to be near her." Before I knew it, Henry lay motionless on the floor. My final words had barely left my lips when his mother began screaming at the top of her lungs. His father promptly called an ambulance to rush him to the hospital. Later, I learned that Henry suffered from a severe breathing condition, and the shock of my revelations, which he had meticulously concealed from everyone, especially his parents, proved too much for him, causing him to pass out. Mixed emotions swirled within me. I wished him a swift recovery, but I couldn't bring myself to regret what I had done.